Finally, 3 more days and it's all mine, my son whispered. He didn't know I was listening. The doctor said the shadow on my lung scan might give me only 3 days. My son Raymond leaned over my hospital bed, squeezed my hand with both of his, and smiled the kind of smile you give someone when you've been waiting a very long time for something to finally arrive. Finally, he whispered, warm and close against my ear. 3 more days. Then it's all mine. My daughter-in-law Sasha stood near the window, already scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up. I'm taking her car, she said, quiet and certain, the way people discuss things that are already decided. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't let a single muscle in my face betray the fact that I had heard every word. I simply lay there on that narrow hospital bed at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Savannah, Georgia, and stared at the fluorescent light above me while the world continued doing what the world always does. A cart rattled past my door. Somewhere down the corridor, a television played a game show too loudly. A woman laughed at the nurse's station, bright and unself-conscious, and for a few long seconds, the ordinary sounds of the living floated through my room like something from another planet. Inside that room, something ancient and irreversible had broken open. It was 2:43 on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. I was 71 years old. And my son, my only child, the boy I had raised alone since he was 9 years old, had just whispered his inheritance into my ear like a prayer he'd been saving for years. It had started an hour earlier, when Dr. Miriam Castillo walked into my room carrying a tablet and the careful expression of someone who has delivered difficult news enough times to know that silence costs nothing. She was a small woman in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and reading glasses resting on top of her head. She introduced herself to Raymond and Sasha with practiced warmth, then turned to me. Eugenia, she said, the imaging shows a significant shadow in the upper lobe of your right lung. There's also evidence of pleural fluid and some markers that concern us. We're going to need a bronchoscopy and additional blood panels before we have a full picture. Raymond leaned forward in his chair. Are you saying it could be cancer? Dr. Castillo chose her words with the precision of someone building something fragile. We can't confirm a diagnosis without tissue analysis. What I can tell you is that the combination of findings places her in a serious category. If what we're seeing is malignant and the fluid is spreading, we could be looking at a very compressed timeline. Sasha spoke next. Her voice was calm, almost bored. How compressed? Dr. Castillo looked at her for a moment. Possibly days rather than weeks. I want to be honest with you so you can prepare. 3 days, Raymond asked. I can't give you a number, but if the progression is what I'm concerned it might be, yes. The situation could deteriorate quickly. 3 days was what my son heard. 3 days was apparently what he had been hoping for. After Dr. Castillo left, Raymond performed grief for exactly as long as he thought necessary. He smoothed the blanket across my legs. He said, We're right here, Mom. He held my hand and bowed his head as if he were praying. I kept my eyes mostly closed, and he made the calculation that I had drifted, that the morphine drip had taken me somewhere soft and unreachable. That was when he whispered it. That was when Sasha mentioned the car. Not just any car. A 1969 Pontiac GTO, candy apple red with black racing stripes, a 400 cubic inch engine, and bucket seats. I had reupholstered myself in cream-colored leather the summer Hector, and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. We had found it rusted and gutted in a barn outside Brunswick, paid $800 for it, and spent 3 years making it whole again. Hector used to say that car was proof that anything worth saving was worth the trouble. Hector died 14 years before that hospital room. He had been my partner, my best argument, my person for 32 years. I still had a photograph of him leaning against the GTO in our driveway, grinning like a man who had everything. Sasha had seen that photograph 100 times. She knew what the car meant. That had apparently made no difference at all. Raymond stood. We should let her rest, he said, and guided Sasha toward the door. But hospital doors don't always close all the way, and ears don't stop working just because their owner is lying down. The car alone is worth at least $60,000, Sasha said in the hallway. More if we find the right buyer. Raymond's voice was low but not low enough. The house is the real asset. When can we list it? Not immediately. We have to be careful about optics. What about the studio? A pause. The studio goes, there's no reason to keep it running. Sasha made a sound of agreement. And her jewelry, some of it's real. We'll go through everything once we're past this. Their footsteps faded down the corridor. I lay very still and looked at my hand, the one Raymond had been holding 40 seconds ago. The skin was still warm from his grip. That was the part I couldn't hold. How a hand could feel warm when the person attached to it was that empty. I need to tell you who I am before I tell you what happened next. My name is Eugenia Lorraine Vasquez Holt. I was born in Beaufort, South Carolina, the second daughter of a seamstress and a shrimper who worked every waking hour to give their children the options they never had. I grew up watching my mother sew other people's wedding dresses by lamplight after dinner, and I made myself a promise that I would build something of my own with my own two hands. I kept that promise. Hector and I opened Lorraine's ceramic studio in downtown Savannah in 1987 with a rented kiln, a borrowed folding table, and $1,100 we'd saved over 2 years. We taught pottery classes on weekday evenings and weekend mornings. I decorated custom tiles for restaurants and hotels. Hector handled everything else: the bookkeeping, the deliveries, the repairs, the students who needed more patience than skill. By the time Raymond graduated from college, we had a waiting list for classes, a gallery space, a small online shop that shipped across the country, and a teaching staff of 7. By the time Hector died, I had 17 employees, a lease on a second location, and a reputation that had taken decades to build. I raised Raymond after Hector passed. I put him through a business degree. I paid off his first car and co-signed his apartment lease and never once kept a ledger of what he owed me, because that is not what mothers do. What I didn't see, or refused to see, was how Raymond had come to understand my generosity as something permanent and unconditional, like a river that would never stop running because it never had before. Sasha came into his life 6 years before that hospital room. She was efficient and precise and pleasant in the way of someone who is always performing pleasantness. She remembered to send Christmas cards and ask about your health and compliment your earrings. But she watched my studio the way someone watches a property they intend to develop, measuring square footage with her eyes. Raymond had started asking questions a few years into the marriage. What would happen to the studio if something happened to me? Had I updated my will recently? Wouldn't it make sense for him to have signing authority on the business accounts, just in case? When I asked why he needed access to accounts I was still fully managing, he would touch my arm and say, "I only want to be prepared, Mom. I love you." Lying in that hospital bed, I finally understood what he had been preparing for. Around 6 that evening, a knock came at my door. Dolores Sandoval was 64 years old, 5 feet tall, and built like someone who had never in her life asked permission for anything. She wore a green windbreaker over her work clothes and carried a wax paper bag from the Cuban bakery on Price Street. She set the bag on the nightstand, pulled a chair close to the bed, looked me directly in the face, and said, "Tell me what happened." I almost cried, not from sadness, from the relief of being seen by someone who actually wanted to see me. Dolores had been with the studio since 1993. She had started as a weekend instructor teaching beginner wheel classes. Over 30 years, she had become the person who held everything together, who trained new teachers, remembered every regular student's name, repaired the kilns when they failed, and once drove 2 hours in a rainstorm to deliver a custom tile installation because the scheduled driver had called in sick. Calling Dolores my studio manager never felt quite right. She was the reason the studio still ran. After Hector died, she showed up at my house every Sunday morning for 6 months with coffee and no agenda. She never asked if I was okay. She simply arrived, sat beside me, and stayed as long as I needed her to. I had never found the words to explain what that meant. Now she sat in the visitor chair with her hands folded and her dark eyes steady, and I told her everything. The doctor's words, Raymond's whisper, Sasha's comment about the car, the conversation in the hallway about the house, the studio, the jewelry. Dolores listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "She said the studio goes," she repeated finally. "Yes." Dolores looked toward the door. "Raymond built nothing." "No." He's been watching you build it for 30 years, and he thinks he can dismantle it in an afternoon. I didn't answer. I was still holding that truth in both hands, feeling the weight of it. Dolores leaned forward. What exactly did the doctor say? Not what Raymond decided she said. What were her actual words? I repeated them as carefully as I could. A shadow on the imaging, pleural fluid, markers that concern us, a bronchoscopy still needed, no confirmed diagnosis. Dolores sat back. My neighbor Maria went through something almost identical 2 years ago. First scan looked terrible. Turned out to be a severe fungal infection, not cancer. Happened after she'd been doing tile work in an old building with mold issues. She looked at me pointedly. We had spent the previous month installing a large custom tile commission in a century-old building downtown. I stared at her. You think? I think you don't sign your life over before the specialist finishes the tests. I gripped the edge of the blanket. Raymond had already spoken to a nurse at the station about palliative care options. Dolores' jaw tightened when I told her. That decision, she said, belongs to you. For the first time since Dr. Castillo had entered my room, something shifted inside my chest. Not hope exactly. More like a window cracking open in a room that had been sealed too long. I reached over and took Dolores' hand. Help me, I said. Whatever happens after this, you'll never have to worry again. She looked at me with an expression that was half affectionate and half exasperated. I'll help you because you're my friend, and because Raymond doesn't deserve to win. We can talk about money when you're alive. She pulled out her phone. I know a pulmonologist at Memorial University Medical Center. She's one of the best in the state. I'll call her right now. She walked to the window for better reception. As she made the call, I looked at the clock on the wall. 3 days. A few hours ago, I had believed that was all the time I had. Now it was the time I had to find out whether my son was preparing to bury me, or whether he had simply revealed himself too soon. Dolores made the call from the corner of my room while I watched the corridor. Raymond could return at any moment. That was the strange thing. I wasn't afraid of the shadow on the lung scan anymore. I was afraid of my own son walking through that door and realizing I had stopped behaving like a dying woman. Dolores ended the call and came back. Dr. Anna Marie Price can review your imaging and lab work tonight, she said. She needs the full file, the scan images, blood panels, and Dr. Castillo's notes. How do we get those without Raymond knowing? I almost said I wasn't sure, then I caught myself. I'm the patient, I said. Such a simple thing, and yet somewhere over the past several years, I had forgotten it. Raymond had gradually, gently trained me to behave as though every decision required his input, which procedures were worth pursuing, which doctors were too aggressive, which treatments would only prolong the difficult. He had framed it as love, as concern, as not wanting to see me suffer. And I had confused his management of me with his care for me. I pressed the call button. A nurse named Philippa came in. She was in her 30s, with close-cropped natural hair and the efficient manner of someone who had seen everything and could not be rattled. I need copies of my records sent to a specialist for a second opinion, I told her. Of course, you'll need to sign a release form. Only me. She looked at me steadily. You're the patient, Mrs. Vasquez Holt. You're alert and oriented. The authorization is yours alone. Something settled in my chest, quiet and solid. Bring me the form. The door opened before Philippa could leave. Raymond came in carrying a coffee from the hospital cafe and wearing an expression of carefully constructed concern. Sasha was behind him. She had changed her top. Oh, Raymond said, seeing Dolores. I didn't realize you were still here. I brought pastries, Dolores said pleasantly, nodding toward the wax paper bag. Raymond looked at her for a beat too long. That's kind of you. Mom really needs rest now, though. I'll decide when I need rest, I said. Raymond turned to me. His expression shifted just slightly, in the way that a door shifts when someone applies pressure from the other side. Then he smiled. Of course, Mom. I just worry about you overdoing it. Sasha set her purse on the visitor couch and looked at the release form in Philippa's hand. What's that? A records release, I said. I'm getting a second opinion. Raymond's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. A second opinion? Mom, the doctor was pretty clear. The doctor said she needed a biopsy before she could confirm anything. She said it could be days. Why would you want to put yourself through more procedures? Because I want to know what I actually have before anyone makes plans, based on what they assume I have. The room went quiet. Sasha looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at the form. Dolores looked at no one in particular and folded her hands in her lap. I signed the release. My hand was steady. Dolores left an hour later, but not before placing her hand on my shoulder and saying quietly, "Dr. Price will call you directly. Don't let anyone answer your phone." Raymond watched her go. Then he pulled his chair close to my bed and leaned in. His voice was gentle, practiced. "Mom, I need you to be careful about who you're letting influence your decisions right now." I looked at my son, his father's jawline, his father's dark eyes, his own particular calculation behind them. Why? People can take advantage when someone's vulnerable, even people who seem like friends. "I've noticed that," I said. He didn't hear what I meant, or perhaps he did and decided to continue anyway. "Dolores works for you. There's a conflict of interest. She's worked beside me for 30 years. Exactly. She has a lot to lose if the studio changes hands." "Is the studio changing hands?" He paused. "I only mean that in this situation, with everything uncertain, you need family around you, people who love you." I looked at his hand resting near mine on the blanket. I did not take it. "I know," I said. "I'll remember that." The next morning, Raymond arrived early. He brought flowers, a laptop, and a manila folder. He arranged my breakfast tray. He spoke warmly to the nurses. He posted something on Facebook with the word prayers and a photograph of us from 3 Christmases ago. Then he opened the folder. "These are just protective documents," he said. "Standard things, so I can handle your affairs if you're too weak to manage them." I looked at the first page, medical power of attorney, sweeping and immediate. The second gave Raymond full access to my financial accounts. The third authorized him to speak on behalf of the studio with vendors, employees, and the leaseholder. "Protective documents," I said. "Just in case, Mom. I'll have Patricia review them." Patricia Odom had been my attorney for 22 years. Raymond's smile held but tightened at the edges. "Patricia handles commercial contracts. This is personal family stuff. You don't need to drag her into it. She's handled my estate planning for 2 decades. She's the right person." Sasha spoke from the couch where she was looking at her phone. "Raymond is only trying to make things easier for you." "Then he won't mind Patricia reading them," I said. Raymond picked up the folder. "You're not thinking straight. The medication makes it hard to." "I am thinking perfectly straight," I said, "which is why I'd like my attorney to review any document before I sign it." That sentence cost me something. Not because it wasn't true, but because I saw in my son's face the moment he recalculated. When Raymond went downstairs for lunch, I asked Philippa to contact the hospital patient advocate and have it formally documented that I was directing my own care. Then I called Patricia from the bathroom with the water running. Patricia Odom picked up on the second ring. She had a voice like good bourbon, warm and with an edge. I told her about the diagnosis, then about Raymond's folder. Her tone shifted immediately. "Do not sign anything," she said. "I wasn't planning to. I need your physicians to document cognitive competency. I'll also need to know every authorization Raymond currently holds, and I mean everyone. Can you come today?" "I'm leaving now." A pause. "Eugenia, are you safe?" I looked at the locked bathroom door, the water still running over my hands. "I'm not certain," I said. That afternoon, Dr. Anna Marie Price called from Savannah Memorial. She had reviewed everything. Her voice was precise and unhurried. "There is definitely an abnormality in the upper lobe," she said, "and the pleural fluid is real. But the pattern I'm seeing is not consistent with a primary lung malignancy. The distribution, combined with your recent exposure history in that renovation building, is strongly suggestive of pulmonary histoplasmosis, a fungal infection." My hand tightened on the phone. "So I might not have cancer. The bronchoscopy will confirm it, but I do not believe this is what your current team initially feared. The infection is serious and requires treatment, but it is treatable." "How soon?" I've already contacted Dr. Castillo. She agrees. The procedure is scheduled for this evening. I sat with that for a moment. Raymond had wanted me home without any of it. He had used the phrase unnecessary suffering when talking to the nursing staff. He had asked about comfort-focused options before a single tissue sample had been taken. "Thank you," I said finally. "Don't thank me yet, let's get the results first." The bronchoscopy happened at 7 that evening. Raymond stood beside my bed beforehand, his hand on my arm, his voice low and urgent. "You're putting yourself through all this for nothing, Mom. If it's already this advanced." "If it's advanced, I'll deal with that when I know. I'd rather know." "What if the answer doesn't change anything?" I looked at my son, "Then at least it'll be my answer." 2 days later, Dr. Castillo came to my room alone. Raymond had gone to get breakfast. Sasha was in the parking lot on a call. Dr. Castillo sat down. She didn't leave space for suspense. "The bronchoscopy results are back," she said. "No malignancy. The tissue confirms pulmonary histoplasmosis, a serious fungal infection likely from your work in that building last month. Treatable with antifungal therapy. You're going to need several weeks of medication and follow-up imaging, but Eugenia, you are not dying from this." I pressed my lips together. I could not speak for a moment. "You're not terminal," she said again, as if she understood I needed to hear it twice. I covered my face with both hands. Below the relief, almost immediately, came the other thing, Raymond's whisper. Sasha's voice saying she was taking my car. The conversation about the house, the studio, the jewelry, the folder of papers. Dollars arrived 40 minutes later. I told her the news, and she gripped both my hands so tightly it almost hurt. "Now we tell them," she said. God knows I wanted to. I wanted to watch Raymond's face when he heard it. But Patricia, standing near the window with her briefcase open, shook her head. "If you confront him now, he'll say he was frightened. He'll say grief made him irrational. He'll deny the recordings, deny the intent, and claim that any documents he requested were out of love." She looked at me steadily. "More importantly, we still don't know everything he's already put in motion." I looked from her to Dollars. "I don't want to spend whatever time I have left playing games." "This isn't a game," Patricia said. "It's the difference between protecting your life's work and losing it." I asked Dr. Castillo to tell Raymond only that my condition had stabilized and that additional results were still being reviewed. Raymond received this information with a nod and a squeeze of my shoulder and said he was relieved, but wanted to make sure I was getting everything I needed. He meant everything he needed. After everyone else left, Dollars stayed beside my bed. "So what now?" she asked. I looked toward the corridor, where my son would soon return to perform another scene of devoted concern. "Let them plan the estate sale," I said. Dollars raised her eyebrows. "I want to hear what they say when they think I'll never answer back." They discharged me from St. Catherine's 5 days later. The infection was responding to the antifungal medication. I would continue oral treatment at home and return for imaging in 6 weeks. Raymond was gracious during the discharge. He thanked every nurse by name. He held my arm walking to the car. He told the discharge coordinator that he would make sure I took every medication exactly on schedule. He sounded like a devoted son. I knew what he was. He was a man who had just been handed more time than he'd expected, and he was adjusting his plan accordingly. Sasha sat in the backseat, scrolling through something on her phone the entire drive home. Home didn't feel like home anymore. The jasmine Hector had planted along the front porch still bloomed in late October, stubborn little yellow flowers that didn't know it wasn't spring. The pottery wheel through the sunroom window still held the ghost of a bowl I'd been shaping the morning before I collapsed. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. Only I had changed, or perhaps I had finally started seeing what had been there all along. Raymond helped me inside and settled me on the living room sofa. Sasha made tea without being asked, which under other circumstances might have seemed kind. "We thought you could use the downstairs bedroom while you're recovering," Raymond said. I frowned. "My bedroom is upstairs." "You'll need to avoid the stairs for a while." Denise, the home health nurse, said limited stairs, not no stairs. He smiled patiently. "Let's not push it, Mom." "I'll sleep in my room," I said. Something moved behind his eyes, then the smile returned. Whatever you're comfortable with. It wasn't worth fighting, not yet. The home health nurse arrived that evening. Her name was Trudy, and she was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the efficient manner of someone who had heard every excuse a patient had ever invented. She checked my oxygen levels, reviewed my medication schedule, and reminded me that full recovery would take time. "You're going to get tired," she said. Nothing new about that. She laughed, then looked at me more carefully. "Are you sleeping all right? I mean genuinely resting." "I'm working on it." After Trudy left, Raymond watched me take my evening pills. Sasha rinsed dishes at the sink with her back to us. "You should get to bed early," Raymond said. "I've been in a hospital bed for almost a week. Healing takes energy." "I'm aware." He sat beside me. For a moment, the familiar expression, the careful warmth, and the orchestrated intimacy of someone performing a role they had rehearsed. "Mom, while you're regaining your strength, it might make sense for me and Sasha to stay here, just for a while, to help manage things." "Manage what things?" "The studio, your accounts, mail, medical coordination." "Patricia manages my accounts. Dollars manages the studio. Trudy is coordinating my medical care." His jaw moved. "I mean family oversight." "I understand what you mean," I said. I closed my eyes. He sat there another 15 minutes, waiting to see if I would yield. I didn't. I woke before dawn the following morning. 40 years of early rising had made my body believe that the dark hours before sunrise belonged to the people who were building something. I moved slowly downstairs with my cane, keeping to the center of each step where the creak was less likely to carry. As I reached the kitchen, voices came from the dining room. "Raymond, Sasha, they thought I was asleep." "The studio lease comes up in March," Sasha said. "That's only 5 months. If we let it lapse, we don't have to buy her out. We just don't renew." "What about the employees?" "They'll find something. They're not our responsibility." Sasha lowered her voice slightly. "And the building? The downtown location is worth twice what the business is. More if we convert it." Raymond's voice had taken on that particular efficiency I recognized, the one he used when he was doing math about other people's lives. "Gallery space is popular right now. Or short-term rental. Either way, the brand disappears, which is fine. She'll fight it. She'll be sick for months. By the time she's strong enough to argue, the decisions will already be made." I stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the back of my son's head. The same head I had held against my chest for years. The same person I had taught to ride a bicycle in the parking lot of our first studio, the one we'd rented for $200 a month and painted ourselves because we couldn't afford a contractor. I turned quietly and went back upstairs. For the first time in my life, the staircase of my own home felt like territory I had to reclaim. Dollars arrived the next afternoon carrying a flat of chrysanthemums. Officially, she was planting them in the front beds before the cold came. Unofficially, she was checking on me. Raymond opened the door for her with his polished smile. "Dollars, you really don't need to do that." "The beds don't know that," she said. She spent an hour outside, then she knocked on my bedroom door. "Mind if I look at the back drainage? The slope near the fence has been pooling." Sasha answered from the hallway, "Help yourself." She had no idea that Dollars and I had used that excuse to talk privately approximately 100 times over 30 years. 5 minutes later, I stepped carefully onto the back patio. Dollars crouched near the fence, examining nothing in particular. Without looking up, she said quietly, "Patricia's been busy." "How busy?" "She found 3 things." Dollars sat back on her heels. "Raymond called your insurance carrier asking about studio business interruption policy in the event of owner incapacity." My jaw tightened. "He contacted your accountant asking for a full business valuation. Said he needed it for estate planning purposes. He has no authority to request that." "The accountant didn't know that. He sent it." I stared at the back fence, and the third. Dollars finally looked at me. "He called your commercial landlord. Asked hypothetical questions about what happens to a lease when the original signatory is no longer able to fulfill the contract." I let out a slow breath. He hasn't gotten anything yet, Dollars said. Patricia stopped every door before it opened. But he planned this carefully, Eugenia. This wasn't panic. This was preparation. I looked at the chrysanthemums she'd brought, gold and copper against the November ground. I know, I said. You're not surprised. I'm surprised it went this far. I'm not surprised he went there. Dollars was quiet for a moment. Then she said, the first documents are ready. Patricia said whenever you're ready to sign. I nodded once. I was ready. That evening, Patricia came over carrying a soup pot and a container of cornbread. Raymond welcomed her at the door. How thoughtful, he said, in a tone that suggested he found it the opposite. After dinner, Raymond went upstairs to take a call. Sasha wandered to the sunroom with her phone. Patricia spread several folders across my studio desk, the small home office where I had done my bookkeeping for 2 decades. Here is where we stand, she said, her voice just above a whisper. 2 physicians have documented that you are fully alert, oriented, and competent to make your own decisions. Good. I've also reviewed every document Raymond has ever had any connection to in your name. He has no existing authority over your business accounts, your estate, or your medical decisions. He was angling to get it. He didn't get there. I nodded. I'm recommending we move the studio into a protected business trust immediately. Dollars will hold operational authority. The building lease will be renegotiated directly with the landlord, with a long-term renewal clause that requires court approval to break. She opened another folder. I also recommend we update your estate documents entirely. The current will was written before Raymond's marriage. Some of its language is more generous than it should be given what we now know about his intentions. She paused. Eugenia, this path leads somewhere. I know where it leads. Are you ready for that? I thought about Raymond at 9 years old, sleeping in the backseat of our station wagon on the drive to a craft fair in Charleston because we couldn't afford a hotel room. I thought about Hector and I watching him graduate and feeling like the world had opened a door it had previously kept closed. I thought about his whisper in my hospital room. Finally, 3 more days, then it's all mine. Yes, I said, I'm ready. The notary, a composed woman named Jean Marbury, arrived at 8 the next morning in a sensible gray coat. Patricia had described her as an old colleague stopping by. We signed everything in my home office while Raymond was in the kitchen eating breakfast and Sasha was upstairs in the shower. My hand trembled slightly. Jean paused. Would you like a moment? No, tell me what you need. In your own words, can you explain what you're authorizing today? I described each document clearly. The studio trust, with Dollars as operational trustee. The estate revision, removing Raymond's current designation as sole primary beneficiary in favor of a distribution that included longtime employees, arts education programs, and a ceramic arts scholarship in Hector's name. The revocation of any implied authority Raymond had been allowed to accumulate over the years through proximity and assumption. Jean nodded. That's all I needed. By 9, everything was signed. At 9:15, Patricia's phone buzzed. She read the message and looked at me. The studio landlord has confirmed the new lease terms, she said. Long-term renewal. March is no longer a deadline Raymond can exploit. Dollars, sitting in the corner chair, let out a breath she had apparently been holding for some time. I looked at the clock. I thought about 3 days. 3 days had turned into something entirely different. Raymond had invited people over for Sunday afternoon. He told me it was so my friends could see me while I was still feeling good. He'd coordinated with the pastor of my church, 2 neighbors, and several people I'd known for decades. What he'd actually done was build an audience for a performance of Devoted Grief, a gathering that could later be described as a farewell. I let him plan it. The morning of, Patricia arrived early through the side door. Dollars was already in the kitchen. The final documents needed one signature I had overlooked. My hands shook from the medication, badly enough that Patricia steadied the paper. Raymond was upstairs. We could hear him moving around. We can wait, Patricia said. We're not waiting. I signed. By noon, cars filled both sides of the street. Raymond had outdone himself. Autumn flowers covered the dining table. A slideshow ran on the television, 4 years of photographs of Raymond and me, Sasha and me, family holidays, birthdays. Hector was not in any of it. The studio's early years were not in any of it. 30 years of building had been edited down to the years Raymond had been present to claim proximity to. My pastor, Reverend Gloria Hawthorne, arrived with her husband. My neighbors Carol and James came from 2 houses down. 6 longtime studio employees came together, including women who had taught beside me since the 90s. Sasha circulated through the room with the ease of a hostess who believed the house already belonged to her. "She's been holding up so beautifully," Carol said to me quietly. I looked across the room at my daughter-in-law. "Yes," I said, "she has." Around 2 o'clock, Raymond tapped his glass. The room quieted. He stood beside the fireplace, beneath a large framed photograph of the 2 of us from his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "My mother wanted the people who love her around her while she still has the strength to enjoy it." I had never said that. "These past weeks have been the hardest of my life." He paused to let that land. "Mom built everything she has from nothing. She taught me that hard work and family are all that really matter." Another pause. "She always said she wanted the studio to stay in the family, to keep her legacy close to the people who carry it forward." My studio manager, a woman named Constance who had been with me for 18 years, glanced toward Dolores. Dolores looked at the floor. "She also trusted Sasha and me to protect what she built," Raymond continued. "And I want everyone in this room to know that we take that responsibility seriously." Sasha lowered her eyes in a performance of humble devotion. I pushed myself out of my chair. Raymond looked over. "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes," I said, "I do." The room went still. I stood with my cane and faced the people who had known me for decades. "Thank you for being here," I said. "Raymond wanted you here to say goodbye." Several people looked down. "Before anyone does that, I need you to hear something I heard." Raymond's face changed. Dolores picked up my phone from the bookshelf and pressed play. My son's voice filled the living room. "Finally, 3 more days, then it's all mine." Nobody moved. Then Sasha's voice. "I'm taking her car." A third recording followed. Raymond and Sasha in the hospital hallway discussing the studio lease, the house, which furniture to keep and which to discard. A final clip. Raymond on the phone with my accountant, requesting business valuations for what he described as estate planning after a terminal diagnosis. Dolores stopped the recording. The silence that followed was the kind that presses against the walls. Raymond recovered first. "You recorded private conversations," he said. His voice was steady but thin at the edges. "I recorded conversations I was part of," I said. "And Dolores recorded conversations that happened in her presence." "You were on medication. You were confused. You didn't." Patricia stepped forward from near the kitchen doorway. "Eugenia was examined by 2 physicians during her hospital stay, both of whom documented full cognitive competency. I have those records." Raymond pointed toward Dolores. "She's been manipulating you for years. She wants the studio." Constance spoke quietly from near the window. "I've worked beside Dolores for 18 years. She's never asked for anything she didn't earn." Raymond turned to her, then to the room. He was recalculating. I could see it happening. Sasha stepped forward. "You have no idea what we've been going through. The fear, the uncertainty." "I heard what you were going through," I said. "Lease timing, business valuations, how little to spend on my funeral." Her face reddened. Reverend Hawthorne folded her hands and spoke quietly. "You brought us here to honor Eugenia," she said. "Let her finish." Raymond turned to me. His voice dropped to something that wanted to sound hurt. "You're punishing us for being scared." "You weren't scared," I said. "Scared people ask how to help. They don't schedule realtors." Sasha looked around the room for an ally. None appeared. "People are going to think you're vindictive," she said. I looked at the people who had sat with me through every hard season of my life. They can decide for themselves. Raymond stepped closer. His voice dropped further. "Mom, you're still sick. You're not thinking." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," I said, "because I finally stopped trying to explain away what I was seeing." His jaw tightened. What did you do, with the studio, with everything? I held his gaze. The studio is protected, I said. It's been placed in a trust with operational authority going to the people who actually built it beside me. The lease is renewed for 10 years. The estate has been updated. Sasha's voice went flat. The house. You'll receive whatever the law entitles you to, no less, I paused, and no more. The room absorbed that. Raymond looked at his mother for a long time. The boy who had slept in the backseat of our station wagon on the way to craft fairs. The man who had whispered into my ear in a hospital room while he thought I was drifting away. You're not dying, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Something had shifted in his face, the realization arriving. No, I said, I'm not. What crossed his face was not relief. Sasha picked up her purse. Raymond followed her without another word. The front door closed behind them. In the silence that followed, Carol looked at the closed door, then at me. Constance sat down slowly in the nearest chair. Dolores looked at the GTO key hanging on the hook beside the door, the one that had been there since Hector put it up 30 years ago, and said it belonged where everyone could see it. It stays, I said. She smiled. I know. The months after were not neat or simple. Real life never ends when someone walks out the door. Raymond retained a lawyer within the week. He challenged the trust on grounds of undue influence. He told mutual friends I had been manipulated during a vulnerable medical crisis. He requested a court-ordered competency evaluation. I sat through it. I answered questions. I explained every document in precise detail to evaluators who needed to verify that I understood what I had done. I did. My physicians confirmed competency. Jean Marbury provided her notary notes. Patricia had documented every step with the care of someone who had known this day might come. The challenge was dismissed. The studio remained protected. Recovery from the infection took longer than I wanted. There were mornings my hands shook and my breath came short and my body reminded me that 71 is not 51. I tired easily. I moved more carefully. But I taught my Thursday evening wheel class from the beginning of December. I sat on a stool instead of standing. I demonstrated slowly. The students didn't seem to mind. In January, Dolores announced she would take on a formal co-ownership role in the studio. The employees gathered in the glazing room, and someone brought a carrot cake, and Constance gave a short speech that made 3 people cry, including me. Dolores, for her part, pretended to be embarrassed, and then spent the rest of the evening making sure everyone's clay was properly wedged. The GTO went to auction in February. I watched it sell to a retired mechanic from Augusta who had tears in his eyes when he saw the engine. He told me his father had owned the same model. I told him about Hector. We stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes talking about the specific joy of restoring something broken into something whole. The proceeds funded a ceramic arts scholarship in Hector's name at the Savannah College of Art and Design. The first recipient was a 22-year-old from the West Side who wanted to make public tile installations. She came to the studio to thank me in person and brought a small bowl she had thrown herself. It wasn't perfect. The walls were uneven and the glaze had dripped. It was exactly right. Raymond sent a single message in March. It said that Sasha had left, that he had made mistakes, and that he hoped someday I might be willing to talk. I read it several times. Then I wrote back. I told him that I loved him the way mothers love their children, which is to say irrationally and permanently, and sometimes in spite of considerable evidence that common sense would suggest otherwise. I told him that love and trust were not the same thing, and that he had broken the second while the first remained, stubbornly, in place. I told him my door was not permanently closed. I told him that if he ever wanted to come and sit beside me and tell me the truth about who he was and who he wanted to become, I would listen. I told him there would be no shortcuts, no accounts, no studio, no car, and no rewards for performing a relationship. Only the actual work of having one. He didn't respond right away. Maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't. I kept the door at exactly the distance I had described. No further, no closer. By April, the doctor said the infection had cleared. The imaging was clean, the lung was healing. I still tired by early evening. Some mornings, my hands needed warming before they were willing to work properly at the wheel. I had become, in ways I couldn't entirely account for, more careful about everything. What I signed, what I trusted, what I called normal. I put Hector's photographs back on every surface in the house where they belonged. I kept my own accounts. I taught classes 4 days a week and let Dolers handle the rest without apology. One afternoon in late spring, I sat on my porch watching a mockingbird insist on the jasmine vine. The air smelled like clay and cut grass and the particular warmth of a Georgia afternoon that has decided to be kind. Dolers pulled into the driveway and got out carrying 2 cups of coffee. She sat in the other porch chair. We didn't say anything for a while. Finally, she said, 3 days turned into quite a year. I looked at the jasmine. Hector had planted it the spring we bought the house because I said I wanted something that smelled like it was trying. It did, I said. I thought about what I would tell anyone who found themselves in that hospital room, in that particular silence, hearing words from someone they had loved that could not be unheard. Getting older does not mean accepting diminishment because you fear being alone. The hardest boundary to set is often the one that saves what remains of your life. If someone has ever tried to write your ending before you were finished, you are not alone. And remember the ones who stay when there is nothing left to gain. They are the ones worth everything.